Ya Hasan, Ya Hasan. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Now I would like to invite Hujjat al-Islam wal-Muslimin, Maulana Saleem Bhimji to recite Majlis-e Milad-e Imam Hasan Mujtaba alayhi salam balantar salawat.
Ya salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. As we begin this evening, if we can recite a Surah Fatiha one time, followed by 3 times Surah Ikhlas for the sponsor of tonight's Iftar program, Sayyid Ijaz Shah, for his thawab and for the thawab of all of the marhumin from his family, with one salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-siratal mustaqim. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. As we begin, as we begin this evening, I'm going to begin with a poem in English about Imam Hasan. Again, this is not written by me; it's written by ChatGPT. But I'll give some beautiful words about Imam Hasan alayhi salam. Imam Hasan ibn Ali, a name that shines so bright, a legacy of nobility, a source of heavenly light. Born to Ali and Fatima from the Prophet's blessed tree, a heart full of compassion, a soul pure and free. A leader and a guide to the people he did turn. His generosity and kindness did everyone earn. A champion of peace, he chose to give up his right. For the sake of Islam, he embraced the path of non-fight. His patience and forgiveness an example for us all. A symbol of true piety, a hero for the call. He lived a life of service with humility and grace, a true embodiment of the Prophet's noble face. His legacy lives on, a beacon of hope and love, a symbol of unity sent from the heavens above. Imam Hasan ibn Ali, a name we hold so dear, may his life inspire us to always persevere. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ثم الصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين لا سيما مولانا وسيدي صاحب العصر والزمان روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء وعجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف ولعنة دائمة على أعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. For the love of Imam Hasan ibn Ali al-Mujtaba, one salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Brothers and sisters in Iman, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. On this, the 15th day of the blessed month of Ramadan, we offer our congratulations to our 12th Imam, Imam al-Hujjah, our awaited Savior, and to all of you. On the birth anniversary of our second Imam, Imam Hasan ibn Ali al-Mujtaba, alayhim wassalatu wassalam, we ask Allah to accept this act of worship from us tonight. We ask Allah to accept our ibadat in this blessed month of Ramadan, and that we continue to be able to worship Allah for the remainder of this blessed month and the next 15 days that we have in front of us, inshallah. This evening, as we celebrate the birth of an individual who's unique in many ways. You know, when I'm thinking about Imam Hasan, we know him as the second Imam, obviously. But he also, if we look at it from the biological perspective, after Mawla Ali alayhi salam and the entire community of Muslims in Mecca, when they migrate to Medina, in the first year of Hijrah, we know that the Battle of Badr happens. And it's between the second and third year where Mawla Ali alayhi salam marries Bibi Fatima alayhi salam. And through that blessed union, the very first child that comes out of that union is none other than our second Imam, Imam Hasan alayhi salam. So he not only is the first child from this blessed marriage between the two ma'soom individuals, he becomes the first grandson of Rasulullah. For any of you in this room who are grandparents, you would know the happiness, the joy that you would feel when your daughter or your son comes home with a grandson. And we can only imagine the level of happiness and joy that was in the heart of Rasulullah. And it was actually at a level of love and happiness that even when Amir al-Mu'mineen brings this baby to Rasulullah, and the Prophet asks Amir al-Mu'mineen that, have you given a name to this child? And obviously, you know, it's the right of a mother and father. We know in Islam, even we're told that the mother and father, it is the haqq of the child over the parents, that they give the child a good name. But Amir al-Mu'mineen, he knows his position. He knows that although this is his son, but Rasulullah is in the city. How can he ever go above Rasulullah? So he says, Ya Rasulullah, that this is your haqq, your right to give a name to this child. We know that Rasulullah would never do anything even without the permission of Allah. And so hadith tell us that Rasulullah said, even I will not take precedence in giving a name to this baby. And he actually waited for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give the name of Hasan to this young child. There's a lengthy event, I won't go through it tonight, but the one thing I will mention is that, you know, in the Quran we have this story of Nabi Zakaria alayhi salam, and that his wife could not conceive for many years. Eventually he basically ended up making tawassul, we can say, or going to where Maryam alayhi salam was in the temple, in the mihrab, and he used that sacred space to pray for a child. Allah gave him Yahya. But the beauty of this is that when Yahya was born, Allah says in the Quran that, "O Zakaria, we've given you a son, and his name is Yahya, and that this is a name that has not been given to anybody before him." And so scholars draw a parallel. They say that when Allah gives the name of Hasan to this baby, the Arabs were told that Hasan and Hussein were names that were not common, very, very, very seldomly used, if at all. And so just as Yahya was given a name that was not common, and Allah says it was Allah that gave him this name, that before people had not used it, we're told in the hadith that Hasan was a name as well that had not had a precedent in the Arab culture. So he was the first in many ways, the first son of Amir al-Mu'mineen and Lady Zahra alayhim as-salam, the first grandson of Rasulullah, the first to have the name of Hasan. And he would continue in his life to be one who would exemplify this name, and he would be one of firsts in many other aspects of his life. As we know that he was born on this day, the 15th of the month of Ramadan, in the third year after the Hijrah. And we know that in the Quran there are multiple ayat, multiple verses that deal with Imam Hasan. You know, the most basic of all of the ayat that we all have probably memorized and know is ayat of Tathir, the portion of chapter 33, verse 33. But we know that many other verses were revealed about him. Right? Ayat of Tathir is when he's a young child. We know that Surah Al-Insan is revealed because when him and his brother fell ill, that their parents took an oath, another, that if the children got better, that the family would fast for 3 days. Allah relieved them of their illness, and as the hadith mentions, that Surah Al-Insan, chapter 76, came down in honor of not only the father and mother, but about also Imam Hasan and Hussein alayhim as-salatu was-salam. We also know that one of his greatest honors, I would say, maybe even more than Surah Al-Insan, more than Ayat of Tathir, is the fact that when Ayat of Mubahala comes, verse 3 chapter 3, verse 61, that when that verse comes to Rasulullah, although Imam Hasan is the grandson of Rasulullah, biological grandson, but in the Quran, when Allah speaks about Imam Hasan and Hussein alayhim salam, Allah says to the Prophet, "Qul ta'alu nad'u abna'ana wa abna'akum." Call your sons, and the Christians of Najran will invite their sons to the Mubahala. Now surely Allah knows Arabic grammar. Allah knows the difference between a son and a grandson. But I think in order for the Muslim Ummah to recognize the preeminence of Imam Hasan and Hussein alayhim salam, to recognize their status is not just a biological relationship, that okay, this is the son of the daughter of the Prophet. Allah referred to him as the son of Rasulullah. Not the grandson, but the son of Rasulullah. And this, I think, is very important, brothers and sisters, that we recognize, and I'm sure we recognize because we're his follower, but we recognize that Allah has given Imam Hasan this status in the Quran. And so despite the fact that 14 centuries have gone by and people have labeled very disturbing accusations, I could say, against Imam Hasan, all of those are pushed to the side because you realize he's the son of Rasulullah. He's the recipient of ayat of tathir, that he's purified from all, he's kept away rather from all impurities. Even he didn't even come close to having an impurity of spirituality. And the fact that he and his family gave all they had for the love of Allah, so that Allah reveals an entire chapter in their honor. Sallu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Imam Hasan has very unique characteristics, and before I go to the main theme for tonight, I just want to mention a few aspects of his life. One is that he's known as Kareem of Ahlul Bayt. Maybe this is a title we've heard. According to our scholars, that this is not based on hadith, however. There's no ayat of the Quran that refer to him as Kareem, obviously. There are no hadith even that call him Kareem of Ahlul Bayt. But somewhere down the line, when scholars were looking at his history, his biography, his accomplishments, one of the things that became very clear from the life of Imam Hasan, and this is seen in all of the Imams, but it was perhaps best exemplified in Imam Hasan alayhi salam, is the generosity that he would show. To the point where we have in the hadith, this is narrated in the hadith, that multiple times, at least 3 times in his life, he took his entire wealth, right? He took his entire amount that his net worth was and gave half of it away in charity. Right? Not 100 dirhams or 1,000, he took half of whatever he had. At least 2 or 3 times he did this, and some hadith also mentioned that at least once he gave everything that he had away in charity. Obviously he kept enough for his family, that's a given, but whatever he had other than that was given away in the love of Allah, for the needy, for the difficult people who are in difficulties and challenges. Not only that, but we're told in the hadith that 25 years he went for Hajj. Now people will say, well, what's the big deal? 25 years? I personally have friends that have gone for Hajj 50 years. But the difference is that when my friends go for Hajj, they fly on Lufthansa, maybe business class, and they get to to Jeddah in a nice taxi or nice coach to get to Mecca. But Imam Hasan alayhi salam, although he had the wealth, he had the ability, he went to Hajj from Medina to Mecca walking barefoot. Now you can imagine, brothers and sisters, that the heat of the desert, walking on the sand of the Arabian desert, shoeless, is something that is not common, I would say. And maybe even in our tradition, it's not even something that would be considered as mustahab, perhaps. But the fact that he did it to show his humility, that, how can I go to the presence of Allah in Baytullah in Mecca with even shoes on my feet? How can I go on a horse or a camel in comfort and luxury? Because that was comfort and luxury in that day. Today it's our vehicles and whatever else we use. But to show the level of humility and humbleness that he has in the presence of Allah, 25 Hajj walking barefoot. Accomplishment that really I don't think any of the others we've seen in history have been able to reach. But then Imam Hasan alayhi salam is somebody who not many other people, if any, could reach in terms of his spirituality and his connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Coming back just very quickly to this generosity, I just want to give us two stories in the life of Imam Hasan to show us the generosity of how he was. Right? It's one thing to give money away, right? Because we know with money you can go and work, you can make more money. It's relatively easy for people to donate, even at that time and even today. But the character, the morality, the akhlaq of the Imam that he gives and that he shows us is something which really, to me, it blows the mind at how the Imams of Ahlul Bayt were. Right? We always look at them as almost superhumans. Right? They have these, sometimes we think they have magical, mystical powers. But at the end of the day, brothers and sisters, they were very much human beings. They lived human lives. But they lived extraordinary human lives that may be things that we would never even do. So I'll give you just two examples. One is when he's a young boy. So we know, as I said, he was born in 3rd after the Hijrah. Rasulullah passes away around 11 Hijrah, 10, 11. So he only has about 7 to 8 years maximum with Rasulullah, with his grandfather. Obviously, the first 3, 4 years you're playing, you're having fun. You don't really understand language as much. You might understand basic words, but to develop a deeper vocabulary would obviously take a bit more time. But one of the beauties of the generosity of Imam Hasan alayhi salam is we're told that when Rasulullah would be in the masjid giving a khutbah, giving a sermon, giving ayat of the Quran that were coming down, giving guidance to the ummah, young Imam Hasan, a young child of maybe 4, 5, 6 years old, he would be sitting there, listening to his grandfather attentively. And he would be listening, and he wouldn't just listen, but because he would grow up to be a man of generous nature and character, he would actually be described in the hadith as running to the house of his mother, Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. He would run to the home, and what would he do? He would begin to tell his mother everything that Rasulullah said in the sermon. Ayat would be coming down to the Prophet. Imam Hasan would hear it and he would go and tell his mother that, guess what, grandfather, I'm paraphrasing it, the grandfather had these ayat come down to him. And when Amir al-Mu'mineen would come home after also hearing the same sermon of Rasulullah, he would begin to tell Sayyidah Zahra alayhi salam what Rasulullah said, that, Rasulullah said this and this and this, and she would basically say to Abul Hasan, she's like, you know what, your son Hasan, he beat you to it. Right? The loving relationship between the mother and the son, that, the mother would not be there every time, let's say, to go to the masjid to hear that, although they lived right next door, their houses was connected to the masjid of Rasul. But yet, Imam Hasan would rush and tell his mother. That loving relationship that the children had with their mother, it's something that obviously she instilled in her children, and it's something that we, parents who are in the audience or soon to be parents, need to recognize, that when you have children, that relationship should be there, that there can always be open communication between between the children and the parents. And this beautiful example of even teaching Sayyidah Zahra, or giving her the teachings, I should say, of what was coming down and what the Rasulullah was giving to the ummah. A second example, and we'll move on about the generosity, is how he was even generous with the animals. Now it's easy for you and I to give food to another human being. Sometimes we go downtown Saskatoon, or we go to another city, or we're driving around and we see people who are homeless, who are on the side of the street, who are begging for food, who are asking for money. Many of us will see this. And if we have a change, unfortunately nowadays we don't always carry money with us, but sometimes if we have change or food, we might go and give a homeless person some food to eat. Imam Hasan alayhi salam takes generosity to another level. So the story is this, that one day he's in Medina and he's sitting on the ground eating some food, presumably some bread or something. And as he's putting bread into his mouth or food into his mouth, a dog approaches. Now, for most of us, because we know a dog is najis, If he touches us, we makes our clothing najis, and there's a whole process to purify ourselves. Most of us would probably push the dog away. Right? We would shoo the dog and throw a shoe at it or throw a rock at it or do something to get the dog away from us. But what does Imam Hasan do? Again, he's the Kareem of Ahlul Bayt. He's the one who has generosity. The hadith says that a companion was around that area. He saw this event. Imam Hasan's trying to eat his food. This dog is there. And he sees that Imam Hasan is giving food to the dog. So the companion of this man says, if you want, I can throw some stones at the dog and get him to run away so he doesn't bug you. Right? What does Imam Hasan say to this companion? He says, and I'll just read you the translation of the hadith. He says, never. He says, don't push this animal away. He says, I'm embarrassed in the presence of Allah Azza wa Jal that a living creature, an animal with a soul, looks at me in my eyes while I'm eating, and that I don't give him any of my food. Right? It's powerful if you think about this, right? That a dog is there. Again, we know the dog to be najis, but yet he has that much concern and love for a creature of Allah that he says, I would not even push that animal away. Right? That I feel embarrassed, he said, not even I wouldn't, he said, I feel embarrassed with Allah that I should have an animal look me in the eyes or as I'm eating food and I don't give it something to eat. So that shows us, brothers and sisters, that the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam are at a different level of their connection to Allah. They're at a different level in terms of their spirituality, of what we call spirituality. Right? For us, spirituality is du'as, these kinds of things which are important, but for the Ahlul Bayt, it was even looking after the animal kingdom, even giving the rights of the animals around them. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In the 15 minutes I have left before Maghrib, I want to very briefly look at a topic that I've labeled as the beauties of the Bismillah. The Bismillah, brothers and sisters, is a phrase that we all know. I don't think there's anybody in this room, from the youngest to the oldest, that doesn't know the phrase Bismillah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim is a phrase that we use every day. Right? It's not only the beginning of every chapter of the Quran except for chapter 9, Surah Tawbah. It comes twice in chapter number 26, if I'm not mistaken. It's something that we recite every day 20 times in the minimum. So in our 17 rakat of wajib namaz every day, the 5 namaz, we say the Bismillah at least 20 times, if I did my math correct. And if we recite all of the mustahab namaz every day, the 34 rakat of the nafilah, including namaz al-shab and the nafilas for fajr, for dhuhr, asr, maghrib, isha, it comes up to 88 times that we say the phrase Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim every single day. But one of the questions that I want to try and answer through the hadith of Imam Hasan alayhi salam tonight is, do we know the meaning and the power of the Bismillah? Right? Forget about Surah Al-Fatiha, forget about the second surah, forget about the ruku and the sajda and all the actions of our namaz. Do we know the meaning of the Bismillah? Because if we're reciting it 20, 40, 80 times a day, maybe more, maybe when we're driving we recite it, do we know what it means? Right? Now there's one time where we would go over the grammatical analysis, look at the Arabic grammar. I'm not going to do that because that would really, take more of the time than we have. So I want to kind of highlight some areas of this phrase tonight in the words again of Imam Hasan, to show us the level of even depth that he went into with his companions over something as simple as this particular phrase. But before that, let me make a note here in terms of the fiqh. When we stand for namaz, we make our niyat, obviously, that we're praying whatever namaz in the day. We say takbiratul ihram. We say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim because it's the first verse of Surah Fatiha. And as we know, for Shias, we believe that the Bismillah is a part of every surah. In Surah Fatiha, it's actually the first verse. For us, for the Shia and Ashari, it's actually highly recommended to recite the Bismillah out loud for even the namaz that we recite quietly for Dhuhr Asr. As we know, for men, It's wajib to recite Fajr, Maghrib and Isha in a audible voice. You can't whisper your namaz of Fajr, Maghrib and Isha, contrary to the women, they have a different ruling. But for men, we have to say every word of the namaz, like for example, the two surahs and the other parts which are an obligation, out loud in an audible voice. In Dhuhr Asr, it's also recommended to recite the Bismillah in an audible voice. But there's an interesting ruling that our Maraja have, and some of the ulama differ on this. But for example, Ayatollah Sistani says that if you're praying, let's say, Namaz-e-Fajr, you pray Surah Fatiha, and then the second surah you want to recite, let's just say Surah Kawthar, you decide to recite. He says that it's not wajib for you to specify the Bismillah when you recite the surah. So you don't have to have in your head the niyat, okay, I'm going to recite Surah Kawthar, so I'm going to say the Bismillah of Surah Kawthar. Right? Because as I said, our ulama believe every Bismillah to be unique. Although it's the same 19 letters, but each time it's unique for that chapter. So Sayyid Sistani literally says it's not wajib to specify the Basmala when you are reciting any surah in the salat. However, if a person specifies it for a surah and then decides to recite a different surah in the namaz, then according to ihtiyat, you have to repeat the Bismillah. So what does that mean practically? Let's say, right now we'll get ready for Maghrib in 10 minutes. After Surah Fatiha, let's just say I make the niyat to recite Suratul Qadr. Inna anzalnahu fi laylatul Qadr. I make the niyat in my mind, I'm going to recite Suratul Qadr. So I say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And before I recite Suratul Qadr, I remember, oh, you know what? I haven't, it's better for me to recite, let's say, Surah Ikhlas. According to this fatwa, according to ihtiyat, I need to recite Bismillah again, because now I'm reciting a different surah than I had the intention for. Right? Even the late Imam Khomeini, may Allah raise his rank, had a similar ruling. He also believed that every Bismillah was unique to every chapter of the Quran. So he also said, if you recited Bismillah for Surah Kawthar and you said, no, I'm going to recite Surah Jummah now, you had to redo the Bismillah. Right? So scholars are showing us, based on hadith, that Bismillah is powerful. It's not just another verse of the Quran. It's not just another phrase that you write on the top of the Quran over every surah. At a metaphysical level, at a spiritual level, every Bismillah is different. And we'll show how, hopefully try to show tonight, how the Imams of Ahlul Bayt made us to know that every Bismillah is a different understanding, a different verse. Although again, it's the same word, the same 4 words, the same 19 letters, but every time it's mentioned in the Quran, it is a different verse to understand. Salu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. One of the things that used to happen at the time of the 6th Imam, and probably even others, but I would say more prominent and defined at the time of the 6th Imam, and you can see this today in the majority Muslim community amongst our Ahl Sunnah brothers and sisters, that they don't have the same regard of the Bismillah that our Imams taught us. You'll see, for example, if you ever prayed behind them or you watch the namaz on television, that they won't even recite the Bismillah out loud. Not all of them, but a majority of them won't recite the Bismillah out loud. They'll recite it quietly, even in Surah Fatiha, and then they'll begin the chapter. Whereas, as I said, for us as Shi'at Nashir, it's highly mustahab to recite it out loud in all of the namaz, the ones that we recite quietly. But when the time of the 6th Imam, this issue came up that people were performing the namaz, leading Jamaat, but they would not recite the Bismillah out loud. And this really, I would say it bugged the Imam, but it bugged him in the sense that they completely had lost the true mission and message of Rasulullah. So what does the Imam say? When this happens in a gathering and the 6th Imam is there, the Imam becomes very upset when he finds that these non-Shias are reciting namaz without the Bismillah. He says in the hadith, "Ma lahum," what's wrong with these people? "Qatalahumullah." May Allah destroy them, may Allah kill them, may they be annihilated. So harsh words from the Imam. What did the person do? Did he murder somebody else? No, they didn't recite the Bismillah. So the Imam says, مَا لَهُمْ قَاتَلَهُمُ اللَّهِ أَمَدُوا إِلَىٰ أَعْظَمِ آيَةٍ فِي كِتَابِ اللَّهِ. They have risen in opposition against the greatest verse of the Quran, of the book of Allah. Right? The greatest verse of the Quran is what the Imam is saying. The greatest verse, the greatest ayah of the Quran is Bismillah. And the Imam prayed for their death. That's not something simple if you think about it. Right? He says, فَزَعَمُوا أَنَّهَا بِدْعَةٌ إِذَا أَظْهَرُهَا وَهِيَ بِسْمِ اللَّهِ الرَّحْمَنِ الرَّحِيمِ. He says that they claim that it is a bid'ah, a heresy, to recite it out loud. And then he said that the verse I'm talking about is Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Again, you can look at the fatwa of the Muslim jurists from the other schools of thought within Islam, and you'll see that they differ. Some say it's okay to recite, some say you shouldn't recite, some say you can't recite, some say it's okay, it's a part of the surah, it's not a part of the surah. They all differ. But the beauty of Ahlul Bayt, brothers and sisters, is they don't differ. Because it's one religion from one God with one prophet with one book. And so there's only one ruling, is that Bismillah is a part, and that you need to ensure that it is preserved and protected, because the Bismillah is, as the Imam would say, the greatest verse of the book of Allah. Salu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. But what does this phrase mean? Again, 30, 40, 80 times a day we say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim in minimum in the namaz. What about if we do it before we eat, it's Bismillah. Before we get in our car, it's Bismillah. When I get up in the morning, I start Bismillah. Every action we're told, you write an email, Bismillah. What does it mean? Right? A basic English translation, in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. Or something very rough like this. Maybe Urdu, if you know the translations, you'll know what it is. But the Imams of Ahlul Bayt would show us that Bismillah is not as simple as, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, or the all-merciful, the all-compassionate. Because these are synonyms almost for one another. Compassion, mercy, they about mean the same. Mehraban, they're all about the same. But when the Imams would describe Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim, they would say that Ar-Rahman ismun khas bisifatin am. War-Rahim ismun am bisifatin khas. They would say that Ar-Rahman is a particular noun, a specific name only for Allah, but its meaning is general. Meaning that everything in existence benefits from the Rahmaniyah of Allah. I talked about this maybe a few nights ago very briefly. That when I say Allah is Ar-Rahman, today when the sun finally shone in Saskatoon after 8 months of winter, or about 8 months, it shone on everybody. The Muslims, non-Muslims, everybody benefited from the sun today. Right? The farmers who are planting their crops, a majority are non-Muslims, maybe even atheists. But when the sun comes and the rain comes and the ground gives the nutrients, they get that benefit too, because Allah is Ar-Rahman. He gives to everybody. He doesn't discriminate. Right? But when I say Allah is Ar-Rahim, or when Allah tells me to say He is Ar-Rahim, He says that yes, I'm merciful to everybody, animals, humans, plants, but my specific mercy will be there on a continual basis until the end of time, and beyond the end of time in Jannah, that will be only for the believers. That level of mercy, that Rahimiyah, goes until the end of time. It's a permanent, a continuous, perpetual adjective. Right? So now if we look at our Bismillah in that way, we're not only saying, in the name of God, the beneficent, the merciful, now we're saying, Allah, I begin my namaz with you because your rahmah expands to all of creation, and also that I hope that your mercy will also cover me in my grave on the day of judgment and well beyond in Jannah. So it's no longer just limited to this world, now it transcends into the world to come. Salu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Time is running against me. I have literally 5 minutes left. So I'm going to speed up and just come to the crux of the discussion for tonight, which is how Imam Hasan alayhi salam described the Bismillah to us. Again, it's his waladat tonight. We have to learn at least one hadith from Imam Hasan. That's the way I like to talk in majalis, is to give at least one hadith from the Masoom that we are celebrating. And how did the Imam give us the understanding of Bismillah? You know, again, we digress for 1 minute, as we tend to forget that all of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, without exception, they gave all of them gave us something to learn from. Right? Not just du'as like Amir al-Mu'mineen, but we have Najul Balagha, compiled by Sayyid Radi, the sermons, letters, and words of Imam Ali, and we have many other books of the sayings of Imam Ali. We only think of Imam Hussein alayhi salam because of Karbala, but we don't recognize the dua of Arafat. We don't recognize the hundreds of hadith from Imam Hussein alayhi salam. All of the other Imams, we have beautiful traditions. Some, like the 5th and 6th Imam, they built up the fiqh. The fiqh of Jafari alayhi salam, we got from the 6th Imam, the 5th and 6th. But Imam Hasan alayhi salam, although he lived in very difficult times, I didn't talk about the accusations against his character, and you know, we have to leave that for another time. But he has some very profound sayings and statements in the books of hadith. One of the books you could refer to is a book which is compiled in Arabic called Tuhfa al-Uqul. It's available online in English, maybe in Urdu, and it's definitely in Farsi, I know for a fact. But this is a very interesting book because the hadith are compiled in order of the Masumeen. So 14 Masumeen, and the chapters are divided like that, 14 chapters, one for each of the Masumeen. And there's not thousands of hadith, there's maybe 100, 150, 200. But it's beautiful, the short sayings, right? You can take one of the Masumeen every month and just go over that chapter, one hadith a day, one page a day. So how does Imam Hasan ibn Ali alayhi wassalam describe the Bismillah for us? When he was asked to describe this phrase, he says it in the following way. He says that when I say, and again, keep in mind that what I'm going to give it to you is what we should have in our mind when we say the Bismillah every time. Or if you pray Jamaat Namaz and you hear Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, try and remember this saying from the Imam, what it means. He says it means Allah is the one to whom all creatures, all creations turn to in times of need and hardship. When all hope from anyone other than Allah is lost, and all means of support from anyone other than Him are cut off. Right? How many times we find ourselves in troublesome times? We might be in a financial problem, we're in some other issue. We go to community members, we go to family, we go to friends, and as we know, sometimes, maybe many times, our own family, our own friends will say, oh, you know what, I can't help you, I'm sorry. Right? Things are difficult, times are tough. I can't give you any support. Could be many other issues, not just financial, but that's the prime time that we go and look for assistance from our close and dear family and friends. The Imam says, recognize that when you say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, you're saying that when times are tough and everybody says, I'm sorry, I can't help, that Allah is there to help. That I turn to you, Allah, because I come to you every day, and I pray to you, and I know that you will answer my prayers. That's one of the gems that Imam Hasan said in the hadith, in the first part of the hadith, of what it means to say Bismillah. He then said a second part, and I'll end with this. He says that saying this phrase, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, it means that you are seeking the help of Allah in all matters, because worship is only directed to Him. He is the one who responds when called upon, and He helps when He is asked. We say this verse every time when anybody gets sick. We're told to say, Amma yajibu mutharra idha da'ahu wa yakshifu su. Right? Who is there that answers the call of the supplicant when he calls upon him in times of difficulty? Again, it's only Allah that will answer our du'as when we fall in tough times. People will let us down. Our family will turn away from us. Friends will, break off relations. But Allah has promised that as long as we continue to turn to Him, Udu'uni astajib lakum, as He says, call upon me and I will answer you. So in a nutshell, brothers and sisters, as I conclude, that the Bismillah is not just, I begin in the name of God, or in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. It's to recognize 20, 40, 60, 80 times a day that I say this, that I only have hope in Allah. I only trust in God. I give up on everybody because everybody has failed me in society. But Allah, before even I was born, He took care of me. When I was in the womb of my mother, He provided me with food. When I was in the cradle, I was getting nourishment. My mother fed me with her milk. I continued to grow, and times will be tough. I lose my job. I'll be on EI, on unemployment insurance, but I'll still have rizq and money coming in. Allah will continue to provide as long as we continue to remember that Bismillah is more than just a phrase. It then becomes a way of life, brothers and sisters. It becomes a way to realign our connection to Allah. And as Imam Hasan was saying, I'll end with this, that we recognize that when all people have completely left us, Allah is there for us. We conclude on this blessed evening, early evening, as we celebrated the birth of Imam Hasan on the 15th of the month of Ramadan. We ask Allah to accept this act of worship from us tonight. We ask Allah to allow us to have the shafa'at of Imam Hasan alayhi salam on the Day of Judgment. We ask Allah for the tawfiq to be able to go to Madinatul Munawwara, to stand in Jannatul Baqi and pay our respects to Imam Hasan alayhi salam in person. We conclude by asking the mu'mineen to recite Surah Fatiha one time, followed by 3 times Surah Al-Ikhlas, for the reward of tonight's sponsor for the iftar in the program, which is Sayyid Ijaz Shah, for his reward, and for all of the marhumin from his family, all of those who have left this world from his family. Let's recite Surah Fatiha 3 times Ikhlas, but before that, one loud salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillah.